So next Wednesday is Bein HaMetzarim, the beginning of a 3-week period called Bein HaMetzarim. And it's a dangerous time. It's a difficult time. It's from the 17th of Tammuz, when the Romans broke through the wall of Jerusalem. It's a fast day. To the 9th of Av, when both the Babylonians and the Romans, 555 years apart, burnt the temple. And during those 3 weeks, it's a dangerous time in the heat of summer. Today's 4th of July, so we need to support this country. This country is basically falling apart. It's anarchy, hatred, causeless hatred, mind you. Not just hatred, but causeless hatred, which is what destroyed the temple. That's what the rabbis say. So we really need to support this country. Now, what I'm going to be talking about today is trying to change our minds, the way that many people think about the coming of Jesus. You know, things are getting worse. Everybody knows they're getting worse and worse every day. And that has to happen before the birth pangs begin. The birth pangs is what the church calls the tribulation. We are not awaiting the coming of Christ. That is not what we're waiting for. So what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to do it through the Torah portion, and I have to show it through the Torah portion for you to understand what I'm saying. We're going to talk about changing our vocabulary, changing our minds to become ready for the kingdom. Not ready for the coming of Christ, ready for the kingdom, because that's our hope. And I've been talking about this for many years, and it seems to me that it's not getting any easier to communicate this message. It should be, but it's not. People are still thinking the same way that they've always thought, that they're waiting for the coming of Christ. We are not waiting for the coming of Christ. We'll talk more about that. So the name of this teaching is They Weren't Ready. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie that in with us, that most believers are not ready for what's coming. We're just not. And I'm not talking about storing stuff in your basement, storing food and buying a gun. That's not what I'm talking about. So these verses that we're going to look at have nothing to do with the teaching, but they're in the Torah portion. They sort of lead up to the teaching. Numbers, or Bamidbar, chapter 20. The sons of Israel, the whole congregation, came to the wilderness of Zin, which is also the city called Kadesh, which is also called later Meribat Kadesh, which means strife of Kadesh. It is also called the wilderness. It is also called the border of Edom, and it is also called Petra. Now, all these, in Hebrew, Selah, which is in the scriptures, Petra is the Greek for that. All these names are for the same place in Jordan, and it is the wilderness. When it says in the scriptures that they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, they didn't. They camped in Kadesh for 38 years. In the first month, they came there, and the people stayed at Kadesh. They stayed there for 38 years. Now, Miriam died and was buried there. Now, there's a huge gap in the narrative. Lots and lots and lots of things happened in between was buried there and there was no water. A lot of things. 38 years of things. There was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves against Moshe and Aaron. The people thus contended with Moshe and spoke, saying, If only we had perished. Why have you made us come up from Egypt to bring us into this horrible place? That place being Kadesh, not, some nebulous place in the desert. Then the glory of the Lord appeared. The Lord spoke to Moshe, saying, Take the rod, and you and your brother Aaron assemble the congregation and speak to the rock, that it may yield water, and let the congregation and their beasts drink, because you have not believed me to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel. Therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. Now, what we talked about several times, especially back in Torah portion Shalach, when the 12 apostles were sent out by Moses to tour the land, 2 Torah portions ago, that land is not the land. It was the kingdom. That's what he told them over and over and over again to be thinking about, to get their eyes on. He told them 3 times, get your eyes on the kingdom, get your eyes on the kingdom, get your eyes on the kingdom. He said land. But we know that from Hebrews chapter 3 and 4 that it's not land. It's the kingdom, the day of the Lord. You shall not bring this assembly into the kingdom which I have given them. Those are the waters of Meribah. From Kadesh, Moshe sent messengers to the king of Edom. Now they're leaving Kadesh. It's 38 years later. They're leaving Kadesh, and he sends messengers to the king of Edom. Behold, we are at Kadesh, a town on the edge of your territory. Please let us pass through your land. We won't pass through field or through vineyard. We won't even drink water from a well. We'll go along the king's way. Now, I'm going to show you what the king's way is. Not turning to the right or to the left until we pass through all your territory. This is Edom. The borders are kind of fuzzy because they would take land, lose land, take land, lose land. It was contested territory. That was the land given to Israel, the Negev, the desert. That was given to Israel, but they didn't take it. They couldn't take it. They've been in Kadesh for 38 years, waiting to go in. Now they have left and they want to go in, I guess, or maybe they want to go south, or maybe they want to go this way. But Edom says, no, you're not coming through our land. Absolutely not. Here's the tour, or the trip, or the wandering that they took from Mount Sinai to Kadesh. It took 11 months. It says in the scriptures it was supposed to take 11 days. It's an 11-day journey from Mount Sinai to Kadesh. It took them 11 months. And then, so they stayed at Sinai for 11 months. Then they journeyed from Sinai to Kadesh for 11 months. And now they're leaving Kadesh. They travel 11 months from Sinai, should have been 11 days. And then it says they came to Kadesh. It's also called the wilderness of Paran. Has a lot of names. Kadesh has Kadesh, Selah, Petra, Meribah, Meribat Kadesh, the wilderness of Zin, the wilderness of Paran, just plain old Zin. Lots of names for this town. So here's a closer view. Here's Edom. They kept taking land in Canaan, in Canaan. And then they would lose it. Then they would take it. Now Judah hasn't formed yet in the land. This is the land of Judah. But they're not there yet. Also, down here is Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula. And they would take land in Egypt, and then Egypt would take land from them. So these borders kept shifting back and forth. Now in Deuteronomy 1:46, it says they stayed at Kadesh. And the way it says it is, and they stayed at Kadesh the days that they spent there, or wasted there. They stayed there for many days, it says, the days that they wasted there. Many days, that's 38 years. Then, from Kadesh, they sent out the tourists, not spies. They sent out the tourists that came up here, and they went all the way up, way up to the top of Israel. And they toured the land. They came back with a horrible report. They spoke Lashon Hara, and God said, on the 9th of Av, you are never, ever going to see the kingdom. In other words, they lost their salvation. That's what that means, and that's what the rabbi said. That entire generation went to Gehenna. They did not go to the kingdom, to the paradise. So they're at Kadesh. They send out the tourists come back, God judges. Then there's the rebellion of Korah from last week. That happened there. Aaron's authority is shown by his rod turning into an almond tree. Then Miriam dies there. That's in the Torah portion this week. And then Moses strikes the rock there at Kadesh. And by the way, I found something really strange. You know, in 1 Corinthians it says in chapter 11, It says that they got water from the rock. The rock was Messiah, the rock that followed them in the wilderness. Well, they didn't wander in the wilderness. They stayed at Kadesh. Therefore, where is the rock? It's at Kadesh, right? But it says it followed them in the wilderness. And I'm like, what? That is nowhere in Judaism. I found it in Judaism. It's in the regular commentary of Rashi. Rashi, the most normal commentator in Judaism, he says that the rock, that when he went to, God said, speak to the rock, and he went to strike the rock, and he hit the wrong rock. So the rock traveled around and came to where he could address it. That the rock traveled, the rock moved. And I'm like, wow, that's in Jewish doctrine? That the rock followed them in the wilderness in Kadesh? Apparently so. So they're at Meribat Kadesh, means the strife, the argument, the fighting of Kadesh. This purple road, that's the king's highway, the king's way. Derech HaMelech. Derech HaMelech, I like that. The way of the king, Derech HaMelech. And it came all the way from up in the Euphrates, from Syria, all the way down on this side of Canaan, on this side of the river, through the Amorite lands, through then Ammonite land, through Moabite land, through Edom land, and look at the road. It splits. This goes off to Egypt. This goes down and it stops at Tzion Gever at the Reed Sea. The split, both go through Edom. So if Israel wants to take the king's way, they must go through Edom. And that's why Edom said, no, you're not coming through. I deny you passage through the king's way. That's basically what they're saying. Now in Numbers 13, it says that Edom denies passage when they leave Kadesh. From Kadesh, Moshe sent messengers to the king of Edom. Thus your brother Israel said, you know all the problems that have befallen us. We cried out to the Lord. He heard our voice. He brought us out of Egypt. Now behold, we're at Kadesh. It's 38 years later since they left Egypt. And he says, now we're at Kadesh, a town on the edge of your border, your territory. Please let us pass through your land, and we will go the king's way. We'll take the Derech HaMelech, not turning to the right or to the left until we pass through your territory. Understand, this is 1 million+ people on a little road. So it's probably going to stretch from here to maybe halfway. If they all stay on the road, it's going to take up half the road, half the way between Kadesh and Tzion Gever, if that's the way they go. If they take this way, it's probably going to go that, if they stay on that way, it's probably going to stretch from here to here. This is huge. It's a huge, huge convoy. So they say, Edom said, you shall not pass. And they say, no, you're not coming through. You shall not pass through us, or I will come out with the sword against you. Again, the sons of Israel said to him, let me only pass through on my feet, nothing else. Y no más. But he said, you shall not pass. And Edom came out against him with a heavy force and a strong hand. They came out with a huge military force to say, you are not coming into our land. So they're stuck. So Israel turned away from him. In other words, Israel had already started moving. They've already started moving out. My question is, are they going into Israel? Are they going into the promised land that God promised them? Or are they going south to the King's Road, or on the King's Road down to the Reed Sea? Which way are they going? That's my question. That's a question I had. Either way, they're hemmed in. They're going to have to either go around Edom, or they're going to have to go north if they want to go into the land of Israel. Bamidbar 21, in the desert 21. When the Canaanite, king of Arad, who lived in the Negev, heard that Israel was coming by the way of the tourists. Now the way it says is the way of the spies, it translates it. But remember, they're not spies, it's the word Torah, Tur, which means the rock dove, and it also means order, rows of pearls, or Torah, or tourist. It's all the same word, to tour. So this is Arad up here in the land of Canaan. I mean, well into the land of Judah, right down below, south of Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac are buried. Right? So these are definitely people from Canaan and from Israel. And these guys from Arad in a huge force come down and meet Israel, which tells us they went north into the land of Israel. They're going into the land of Israel? Did God say, okay, go take the land? Nope. But I guess they're just picking up where they left off, maybe. I don't know. But they are definitely coming into the land of Israel. And these people from Arad, huge force of men, come down to attack Israel. Because it says, the way of the tourists. The way of the tourists was in and into the land of Israel. So, then he fought against Israel and took captive. That's all it says. Took captive. Rashi says it was one woman captive. We don't know. So Israel vowed to the Lord, if you will deliver this people, the people of Arad, whoever that is, if you will deliver this people into my hand, then I will utterly destroy their cities, plural. The Lord heard their voice and delivered up the the Canaanites. Then they utterly destroyed them and their cities, plural. So the name of that place was called Hormah, destruction. That means the Jews took land in Israel, in the Holy Land. They've gone into the Holy Land and they took the Holy Land. They're there. They're in the kingdom, right? No. Everything falls apart. Everything, and it doesn't say why in the scriptures. Anywhere. Israel had taken the land. Not only did they take the land down here, but they came all the way up here and took Arad. And they called it and the cities around it Hormah, destruction. They took the land of Israel. So why not go in? You know, it's in my mind, it's just me. I thought, it's like the believers. We've had victory after victory after victory, and now Yeshua will come. Come on. No, it's not time. It ain't time. That's all there is to it. That whole generation isn't dead yet. It hasn't been 40 years. It's been 39 years. They still got one more year to go. And that last year is going to be hell on earth. It's going to be horrible. Battle after battle after battle after battle. Now they do take land in this final year, but that's way up north, on this side of the Jordan, way up north. They take the land that's going to belong to Reuben. This is going to belong to Reuben, and then they take land that's going to belong to Gad and to Manasseh. But that's later, in the final year. It is not time for the coming of the kingdom. If I was there, God, if that was recorded in Scripture by God, God could have said, and Moses should have said, it's not time for the kingdom. But look what had just happened. It had just been named Medibat Kadesh. And God said, Moses, you're not going into the land. That just happened. And right after that happened, they take off to Mount Hor, which is north of Kadesh. The whole congregation goes to Mount Hor. That's where Aaron dies, and Aaron doesn't get to go into the land. So now, both Moses and Aaron have been promised that they can't enter the land. And so, they go in. Doesn't say they couldn't, but it doesn't say that God told them to either. And they got attacked. Sounds bad, but they won the battle. They them back and took more land and cities. Sounds good. But it's not time to enter. And so what happens is they are sent down south to the Reed Sea to start over. Let's talk about this. It says, number one, they were coming by the way of the tourists. So we know it's in the land. That's number one. Number two, it says God delivered up the Canaanites, which, by the way, there was Amalek. Amalek was living in Arad. These were Amalekites, and God said, I want you to wipe out the Amalekites from the planet. And they did. So this sounds really, really good. They're taking Israeli land. But instead, God sends them to the south. Bamidbar 20:4 through 6. Sorry. Bamidbar 20:4 through 6. Then they set out from Mount Hor down south. They have to go around Edom by way of the Reed Sea to go around the land of Edom. And the people became impatient because of the journey. And the people spoke against God and Moses, and the Lord sent fiery serpents to bite the people. So now it just gets worse. Remember, they're in the final year that they have to be outside the land of Israel. After 40 years, God said, you are not going in for 40 years. There is a set time for them entering the kingdom. Now think about that for you. You think the Lord can come at any moment? You're wrong. You are dead wrong. There is a set time when the kingdom will come. And guess what? You're supposed to know when it is. Moses was told, the entirety of Israel was told, you are not going in for 40 years. They could count the days. Then they set out from Mount Hor by way of the Reed Sea. So now they're going to go south. Now what's strange about this is that this had happened before. This exact thing had happened before. They were at Kadesh. They sent the tourists in from Kadesh. The tourists went in. They came back, right? They came back, gave a bad report. God judged. And guess what God said? God said, I want you to go south by way of the Reed Sea. I don't have it here. I thought I had it here. I don't. God says in Bamidbar 13 or 14, he says, now leave Kadesh, because they just sent these tourists out. And he says, now turn and go south to the way of the Reed Sea. Did they do it? No. They said, we're going to go up and fight. Actually, I do think it is on here. First, we're going to talk about this. We went over this at Shalach 2 Torah portions ago. If you don't know this passage, you are not understanding what God promised us. You're just not. There's no other way to say it, really. People are waiting for Jesus to come. Jesus is not coming. He is coming. He's not coming. That's not what we're awaiting. There's many, 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 many events that we're waiting. The first one is not Jesus coming. People are awaiting the rapture. That's wrong too. So we're going to talk about terminology. We're going to try to clear up the terminology. But if you don't understand this basic thing, that the land was not the land, it was the kingdom, you don't have a construct in which to build your understanding of, quote, eschatology, means last days things. You have no form in which to place your doctrines and your beliefs. So everything you believe is muddy, it's fuzzy, it's hard to figure out when things will happen, where to place them, and all that. And you know that's true because you feel it all the time whenever this issue comes up. What you need to do is know when things are and what to call them. If you can start that process, I guarantee you that what will happen is your mind will clear. You will have clarity about where to place the doctrines, in what order, and what they look like, sound like, smell like, feel like, and what scriptures to look at that are appropriate for each and every item in that list of things. You got to build a list, though. Now, here's the foundation that tells you how to build the list. We're not going to go through the whole thing. We did that 2 Torah portions ago. I only want to say this, that from the year 1 to the year 6000 in the biblical calendar is 6 days. Each day is 1,000 years long. That's from 2 Peter chapter 3. Sorry, it's from Psalm 90 verse 4, quoted in 2 Peter chapter 3, but it's in Psalm 90 verse 4. And the rabbis said, especially Rabbi Katina in the Talmud said, he quotes the verse in Psalm 90 verse 4, and he says that day, the last day that's 1,000 years long, is talking about God's Sabbath. For there's 6 days and then the Sabbath. And that's God's day. It's 1,000 years long. For it says that day is Yom Shekulo Shabbat, a day that is all of its Sabbath. That is exactly and precisely what the writer of Hebrews says. Not only does he say it, but he says it over and over and over and over again by quoting this thing that happened with Moses at Kadesh. It was named Medibat Kadesh, the strife at Kadesh. And he, the writer of Hebrews, quotes this over and over again from the Psalms about Kadesh, the Medibat Kadesh, which says, "So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. I was angry with that generation, because they always go astray in their heart. They did not know my ways. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my wrath. They shall not enter my rest." He quotes it over and over again. And he makes clear that this 6,000 years is called today, Hayom, the day. But this is another day. It's also called Hayom, the day. But then he defines that day by calling it a 7th day. Well, first of all, he calls it a day. He calls it rest. He calls it a 7th day, and he calls it Sabbath. And that's God's day. That's what we're waiting for, not the coming of Christ. Now, if you can't see a difference between those two, you're going to have to work at this. You're going to have to work it and work it and work it in your mind. Work through this passage over and over again until you can see an absolute and clear distinction between the 6 days and the 7th day. The time period called today and the time period called 7th day or a day. You're going to have to do that work in order for your mind to really get wrapped around this concept. Now, because of that, he says, if Yeshua, we can also say Joshua because they're interchangeable names. Joshua and Yeshua are the same person. They're the same name. For if Yeshua, or Joshua, had given them rest, in other words, led them into the land, he wouldn't have spoken of another, it should say land after that, but it doesn't. It says day. Because they were not going into a land. They were supposed to be going into the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord. But they didn't. So, now that you understand the basic foundational concept of what they were supposed to be going into, not the land, but the day, a day, the day of the Lord, the kingdom. Now let's talk about this repetition that occurred. But, you know, my dad used to say this. He used to say, "What's the purpose of this exercise?" Like we would do something, and you know, I don't know what, like cleaning the front yard or something like that, and we did it wrong. You know, we didn't do what he told us to do. We didn't do it the way he taught us to do it. So he would say, what's the purpose of this exercise? And in other words, we have to repeat it over again. We got to do it again. We failed the exercise. That's what happened to Israel. They went from Mount Hor into the land of Israel. They beat back the Amalekites all the way to Hormah, took a bunch of cities, wasted them. They took the land of Israel. They have to come back, and then they're sent south. Because that's exactly what happened with the tourists. Numbers 13, 1 through 24, the 12 apostles go tour the land, the kingdom. They went to tour the kingdom. Numbers 13, 25 through 14:4, the apostles return and they do Lashon Hara against the land, and God says, you're never entering the kingdom. Not just the land, the kingdom. Numbers 14 says God shuts them out of the land or the kingdom on the 9th of Av. Numbers 14:25, immediately God tells them to turn south to the way of the Reed Sea. And you know what? I never saw this. I never saw this whole exercise, and it had to be repeated all over again. But that's what happened. In Numbers 14, from verse 20, God says, I've pardoned their sin because you've prayed for them, but they will never enter the kingdom. Verse 23, they shall by no means see the land which I swore to their fathers. And we know that's the kingdom. Verse 25, now the Amalekites and the Canaanites that lived in the valleys turn tomorrow and set out. That's really strange. I never saw that either. That down here was not just the Canaanites, but Amalek, our sworn enemy. And that's who they took these cities from. Verse 25, now the Amalekites and the Canaanites live in the valleys. So turn tomorrow and set out to the wilderness by the way of the Reed Sea. In other words, go south. Go back to the Reed Sea. So I never saw that before. The same exact thing happened the first time. The tourists went in by the way of the tourists. They came back to Kadesh, and then God immediately said, go south to the way of the Reed Sea. And the same thing happens 38 years later. 39 years later, I think. 39 years later, the same thing happens. Before, God said, go south to the Reed Sea, and they tried to enter the kingdom, and they lost everything. Now, right after this chapter, this passage in Numbers 14, what it says is they all cry, and they weep, and they mourn, and then they go, oh, no, let's go up and fight. And they try to go in, and they get beat by the Canaanites and the Amalekites. They lose. And so that's when God says, he had said, go south. They didn't do it. They just stayed put in Kadesh. They didn't do what God had said to do. The proper order was, you've been beat. It's not time for you to go into the land. Go south. Go back to the Reed Sea. But they didn't. They stayed there. They stayed at Kadesh. After 39 years later, after the 40 years, after the 39 years, they beat Arad to Hormah. Then they went south and they started to complain, and God sent snakes. Then they had trouble with the Amorites. Then they had trouble with Moab. Then they had trouble with Midian, and trouble with Balaam, and trouble with the Midianite women. It's just trouble after trouble after trouble after trouble in this last year. But they did repeat the exercise. They did. They went south. So my question was, how come they couldn't go into the land? Because they weren't ready. It wasn't time. Those 40 years weren't up. And they weren't ready. They hadn't died yet. That whole generation wasn't dead yet. There were still a few stragglers. Still a few that hadn't died off. They still got another year for the rest of them to die off. So they're not ready. They're not ready for the kingdom. And this is my opinion. I think it's pretty easy to see The body of Messiah is not ready for the kingdom. The reason I say that is pretty simple. There's idolatry in the body of Messiah. Gentile, pagan ways in the body of Messiah. It's not a Jewish body. It's supposed to be a Jewish body, but it's not. It's a Hellenized body. Now, how can the body of Messiah be ready for the Jewish kingdom to come if it's not even a Jewish body? And they're not thinking Jewishly, we'll say, about this whole thing, about this whole story. Because the body of Messiah clearly is not. I have been banging my head against the wall trying to teach about the kingdom to believers for 40 years. And it's been 37, 38 years that I've been doing this. Isn't that interesting? It's been 37 or 38 years that I've been banging my head against Christians' hardness, the hard-hearted, hard-headed Hellenism. I've been banging against that all this time. Why? It should be like butter. It should be so simple. Everything I say for Christians to receive. Oh yeah, that's right. That makes sense. I have to get rid of my paganism. It should be that easy, but it's not. That's not my fault. That's the fault of the Hellenism that's in the body of Messiah. That's just the way it is. So, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, I don't think the body of Messiah is ready for the day of the Lord to come. I think we're just like Israel, going in and, you know, we beat Hormah. We beat the Amalekites and the Canaanites a little bit. We took some cities. And then God says, okay, well, get out of here. Go south. You're not ready. Yeah, but look what we did. Sorry, it ain't time. This is my opinion. So just because the exercise was repeated and Israel won, because they did win, and they had learned a little about God, they did, it doesn't mean they were ready to be given the promised land, the promised kingdom. They weren't ready. And just, you know, if we apply this to believers, to our time, you could say, just because you're a believer and you've won some battles and you've learned some scripture and have a relationship of sorts with God, doesn't mean you're ready for the promised kingdom. It doesn't. I'm sorry, but it doesn't. You need to be ready. Now, the key to this entire thing, the linchpin to this entire thing, is rank. In the scriptures, well, let me say it this way. When David saw by the Spirit, he saw, it says, in a vision from heaven, in a vision in heaven, he saw how to set up the entire kingdom. This is in 1 Chronicles 28, verse 9 through 11. It says that he saw in writing this pattern, this picture that I saw by the Spirit, how to set up the entirety of the kingdom, the temple, and everything for the kingdom. Everything. He saw it by the Spirit. When he set up that kingdom, he set it up with these words: high and low, teacher and student, great and least. And you can look this up yourself in 1 Corinthians chapters 23 through 28. It comes up many times. There was high and low, teacher and student, great and least. Then Yeshua comes along and says this horrible, horrible passage that I have, by the way, in 38 years, I've never heard anybody quote this passage. They always quote Matthew 5, 17 through 19, but they never really focus on the last part of this verse. Do not think that I came to abolish the Torah and the prophets. That's the Tanakh. The Torah and prophets is the Jewish Bible. It's Judaism. It's the culture that God gave to the Jews. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. Everybody loves that. Oh, Yeshua came to fulfill. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the Torah until everything is accomplished. I've even heard that quoted and taught, which is great. But then, most people stop. But this is the most important part. Whoever then annuls one of the least of these mitzvot. There are 613 mitzvot. We can do 200 and some of them. The rest we cannot do because there's no temple and we have no king. And we're not in the land of Israel. Whoever then annuls the least, listen to me, whoever then annuls the least of these mitzvot. This is Jesus talking, Christians. Think about this. You're the guy that you follow said, whatever you do, don't get rid of any of the mitzvot in Judaism. Because whoever annuls the least, even the smallest of the mitzvot, and teaches others to do the same, Christian leaders for 2,000 years have been doing this every Sunday, usually twice a day, and teaches others to do the same, will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. That to me is the most important part of the passage. But I've never heard that focused on. But whoever keeps the Torah, the mitzvot, keeps the mitzvot, that means does them, and teaches the mitzvot, he will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. He is quoting 1 Chronicles 28 that says that when David set up the kingdom, he set it up by a picture, a tavnit, that he was shown in heaven. That's what he's quoting. And in all that setting up, from 1 Chronicles 23 through 28, it talks about rank. It talks about great and least. They're all in the kingdom. Everybody's invited. Think of it like a story. That there's a king who's throwing a party, he's throwing a huge party for his son. And he invites everybody. But, there's different invitations. One guy, he's just a normal guy, and he gets this invitation. It's like, you're invited to this huge kingdom party. Come. So he gets ready, buys a new suit, he gets himself cleaned up, and he takes off, and he's getting ready to come to the wedding. Now, meanwhile, across town, there's this guy, he has a whole retinue of people show up in a limousine, and they come and they invite him to the wedding. And they've got, champagne, and they've got a gold engraved invitation, and they give him gifts, and he's invited to the wedding. And okay, great. They tell him, we're going to send a car for you, and you're going to have a place seated near the king, place of honor. He's like, all right, cool. So both of them come to the wedding. The guy who's just a normal guy, he takes off for the wedding, and it starts pouring rain. And he gets drenched with this rain. And he's almost there, and he's about to get to the bus, and there's a bus that he's going to take, and the bus takes off. No, he's banging on the window, please, don't leave me, please. And it leaves without him. And so he has to walk the rest of the way. And as he's walking, he gets beat up. Some people come, and they beat him up, they take all his money. So he finally gets to the wedding. It's midnight, and the wedding's, the big party is almost over, and he gets to the gate, and he says, there's guards there at the gate, and he says, I'm here, I finally made it. And they say, okay, where's your invitation? reaches into his pocket and it's garbage because it's been rained on. It's soaking wet, can't read it. It's all the letters are faded, it falls apart in his fingers, and they say, sorry, you can't come in. And he can see through the gate, he can see the king, he can see the guy who was invited with the big retinue and the ride that they sent for him. He can see him there. And he says, listen, I had an invitation, you gotta let me in. And he says, I'm starving, I haven't eaten anything. And okay, all right, we'll get you some food. Somebody bring him a plate. But he has to eat outside the party. He's there, but he's not allowed in. Everybody's invited, and here's the thing. Where do you want to be? There's hundreds of ranks. There's hundreds of levels. Are you satisfied to just be, outside the gate eating a plate of stuff where you can see the fun, but you can't enter in and you can't do anything? Is that good enough for you? Because if it is, that's what's going to happen for you. If you do away with the least of the mitzvot, is it starting to sink in to you now how big a deal this is? Judaism. Are you starting to see what a huge deal this is? If you do away with the least of the mitzvot, oh, you don't need to do Sabbath. That's been done away with. You're put lower. You may get in because God's kindness in sending the Messiah, and you have salvation through Yeshua. You might get into the kingdom, but you're going to be least in the kingdom if you do away with Judaism on any level. Now that's for me too. I don't think this isn't for me. This is for me. If I do away with Judaism on any level, if I say, I'm not going to do that mitzvah. I don't feel like it. I'm not going to do it. You lose rank. And this can happen a lot. You can go up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. Hopefully, we're climbing in rank. Now, see that word? See that word, that phrase? That's what everybody misses. This is in the kingdom. The kingdom is coming. Jesus Christ is not coming. The kingdom is coming. That's the problem. The problem is we have switched in our head and we're thinking wrong. Well, I'm not. Most people are thinking wrong about what's coming. The Lord Jesus Christ is not coming on the clouds for you. That's not true. The Messianic kingdom is coming. Now that's only the first thing. That's only the first thing. There's a lot more. So let's talk about it. I looked up Jesus coming or his coming or ready for his coming. And there's literally tens of thousands of images. And they're all wrong. Every one of them is wrong. Are you ready for his coming? The Bible never, not once, says ready for his coming. You know what it says? Ready for its coming. What's it? The kingdom. The day of the Lord. Ready or not, I'm coming back. Jesus, in case you didn't know who was saying it. Not true. He's not coming back. It is coming. The kingdom. Are you ready? Jesus is coming. The clock is ticking down. It's almost been 40 years, and all that generation has been killed. It's almost here. You're almost ready to cross into the land. No, we're not. You're not ready. You're not ready. You're not ready. It's not a clock ticking down that you don't know when it's going to be time. You're supposed to know when it is coming. Not when he is coming. When it is coming. The end is near. The word end is a biblical word, ketz. And it's only found in the Old Testament. It's not found in the New Testament. Only found in the Old Testament. Haketz. The end, haketz yamin, the end of days. Only found in the Old Testament. Not found in the New Testament. It's found in the little ridiculous headings that the translators put in the Bible. The end times, the end days, the message of the end, signs of the end. Never appears in the Bible, in the New Testament. Only appears in the Tanakh. Are you ready for Jesus to come? Jesus ain't coming. I'm sorry, but he's not. I'll explain more about what I mean. It'll become clearer what I'm saying. I really like this one. Are you ready for Jesus to come? My whole family is ready for Jesus to come. We're going to all go together. Look how they're looking up. What do you think they're waiting for? The rapture. They're all going to go in the rapture together. Ain't going to happen. This one, I don't want to make fun of anybody. I used to love to make fun of people's Lashon Hara. But this one has a lot of unbiblical words in it. Prophetic message, maybe. There might be that. Tribulation, not a biblical word. Last days, that is a biblical word, but not in the New Testament. Acharit Yamin. Micah chapter 4 and other passages say, in the last days, the mountain of the house of the Lord will be raised up above the mountains and above the hills. And all the people will say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord. It's the kingdom. End times, not a New Testament word at all. Jesus is coming, are you ready? And why is this guy yelling? Why is he yelling at us? So this one, it tries to put a whole bunch of stuff together, and all of it's wrong. All of it's muddy and mushy and hard to ascertain what's being said. Do you live as if the Lord were to return today? I know, I've heard this said for 40 years. Christians say this. Are you living as if the Lord were to come today? He could come at any moment. No, he can't. No, he cannot. He's coming at a specific time that you are supposed to know. It is coming. The day of the Lord is coming at a specific time that you are supposed to know. Both events are different events. Are you ready for the marriage supper? That's an interesting one. Another event that's down the road in the kingdom. The kingdom is 1,000 years long, the day of the Lord. Thousands of events are going to take place during those 1,000 years. Thousands of them are going to take place in the first 7 years, which is called the birth pangs, what the church calls the tribulation. Thousands of events, and you're supposed to know all of them and when they're going to occur. I got thrilled when I saw this. The kingdom is coming. Are you ready? Israel was not ready to enter the kingdom. We are not ready. Most people are not ready to enter the kingdom. I've been ready for 30 years. I've been ready for the kingdom for 30 years. I am ready. I know what's going to happen. I know when it's going to happen. I know how it's going to happen. I know who it's going to happen to. And I've spent the last 30 years just having that confirmed over and over and over 100,000 times. I know the day of the Lord. I know the kingdom. I love this phrase. I am kingdom ready. Are you kingdom ready? It was just said to me a few days ago, I feel more kingdom ready than I've ever been. Love that phrase. Love it. I feel more kingdom ready than I've ever been. That's what I want for you. I want you to be kingdom ready. I want you to know what we're doing. What are we doing here? What is this whole plan? What is going on? Why are things getting so bad? Because the kingdom is coming. He is not coming. Now I'm going to tell you something I don't usually talk about. I don't usually say this to people. But I'm going to say it publicly. When Eileen and I got married, this was one of our wedding photos that captured what we were after. We were acting out Rosh Hashanah and the beginning of the coming of the kingdom. Not the coming of Christ, the coming of the kingdom. And we knew what we were doing. This is 34 years ago. 34 years ago. We were acting out the coming of the seventh day, the Sabbath, the day of rest, the kingdom. We were acting out the day that starts. Right here, the year 6000 or 6001 at Rosh Hashanah. So we got married right around Rosh Hashanah, as close as we could. There's the chuppah, which is heaven. I was playing the part of Yeshua, the bridegroom, and my wife was playing the part of Israel, the bride. And we acted out the whole thing. We had it narrated as we were acting it out. Now, because we were acting out the day of the Lord and not the coming of Christ, there was a prophet there by the name of Marina. Marina, if you are still alive and watching this, we remember everything. It was very, very important. And she saw Yeshua standing behind us. Now, we were up in the chuppah. I was standing up in the chuppah, and Eileen was being led up with two angels up to the chuppah. She was playing the part of Israel, the bride of Messiah, coming up in the resurrection to meet the bridegroom. I was standing in the chuppah, up higher than her, and Marina saw Yeshua standing behind me, and he had his hands up, and he said, "Go tell them when I'm coming." He didn't say tell them when the kingdom is coming. He said tell them when I'm coming. We were already in the kingdom, in the picture. So he could say tell them when I'm coming. If we were acting out this time period, he couldn't say that. Because we're not looking for his coming. We're looking for the coming of the day of the Lord. Now, the same precise and exact thing is shown in the book of Revelation. In the book of Revelation, you are in the day of the Lord. It says that in chapter 1, verse 10. You're already in the day of the Lord. Verse 10 says, I was in the Spirit unto the day of the Lord, the Lord's day. And I saw, writes all this stuff that he saw. All of it is in the day of the Lord. And so within the confines of the day of the Lord, Yeshua can say, I'm coming, because he's coming during the day of the Lord. When? When? All right. These are all the terms that people use that need to be changed, or some of the terms. There's more, but these are the basics. You know, I have no understanding if anybody is going to hear this, if anybody's going to see it, if anybody's going to understand anything I'm saying. We'll receive it, and we'll do anything about it. I hope that occurs, but I have no assurance that will occur. That's why I'm doing this. These words need to be changed for us to begin, just to begin to know the day of the Lord and to be ready for its coming. The coming of Christ, you should never say that ever again as long as you walk planet Earth. That's not in the Bible, not one single time. It is a wrong phrase. First of all, Christ means Messiah. So why don't you say coming of Messiah? That might be in the Bible. Not sure it is. But we need to change that to the coming of the kingdom. The coming of the kingdom. That's our hope. Or the coming of the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is the kingdom. The day of the Lord is not the coming of Christ. The day of the Lord is not the coming of Jesus. The day of the Lord is not the rapture. The day of the Lord is not the tribulation. The day of the Lord is not anything else but God's day. The 1,000-year kingdom. So you need to change that word from coming of Christ to coming of the kingdom or coming of the day of the Lord. And if you want, you can add when it happens. Rosh Hashanah, the year 6001. That's what we were acting out. We were acting out Rosh Hashanah, the year 6001. And we told everybody this. We are acting out a picture of Rosh Hashanah when the kingdom comes, when the day of the Lord comes, at the beginning of it, at Rosh Hashanah, when the resurrection happens, at the blowing of the shofar, and the Lord takes his bride, and we go into the chuppah for 7 years. And we told everybody this. And so, you need to change that wording. The next one is the return of Jesus. I can't tell you how many tens of thousands of times people have said, oh, you're doing such a wonderful thing because you're preparing people for the return of Jesus. And I just keep my mouth shut, because what am I going to do? Tell them the whole story? Tell them the whole gospel? I can't. That needs to be changed to the return of the Messiah in judgment at Yom Kippur, the year 6007. That's a mouthful. But instead of saying the return of Jesus, you need to say the return of the Messiah in judgment after the birth pangs. After the birth pangs. The first 7 years of the day of the Lord is the birth pangs. After that, in that 7th year, at the end of the 7th year, then Yeshua comes back from heaven to earth with us. And we completely destroy all the cities, just like Israel did to Arad. And they made it Horma, destruction. Just like all the cities they took on the other side of the Jordan, from Og and Sihon, the kings of the Amorites, these giants. They took all their 60 cities. 60 cities. That's 6,000 years. Okay, so you need to change that one and start thinking about resurrection takes place at the beginning of the day of the Lord. We're there for 7 years. We come back at the end of the birth pangs with Yeshua. So you can't really say return of Jesus, because people are thinking about the year 6001 at Rosh Hashanah. It's wrong. The rapture. There's no such thing as the rapture. That's not a biblical term. That's a Latin term for an adjective, which means to be drawn up or brought up. And it's in the context of the resurrection. And it says resurrection. And it says day of the Lord. So that needs to be changed to the resurrection. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, it says resurrection, resurrect 22 times. 22 times, I believe. And so people say rapture. They read it 22 times, close the book, and say it's talking about the rapture. It's not. It's talking about the resurrection. There is no rapture. Well, it's what people think of when they say rapture. They're thinking of the resurrection. Just need to change the words. The tribulation. Bible never says the tribulation, nor does it say the great tribulation. It says Hatzar Gadol, or Hatzar. Tsar means trouble. Tsuris. When we were growing up, my mom would say, no, you're such tsuris. That's Yiddish for sarot, which means troubles. And the birth pangs are called, they're called two things. Sorot, troubles, and birth pangs. Kevle, birth pangs. And it's called this hundreds of times. It's an adjective. It's not a title. It's not a title. The title is birth pangs. The adjective that describes it is the trouble, the tsur, the tsuris, the tsorot, the troubles, the tribulations in Greek. It's an adjective. So the tribulation, there is no such thing. It's the birth pangs. The millennial reign. It's the kingdom. It's the day of the Lord. It's the messianic kingdom. That's what it was called in the first century. It is the Shabbat of God. You should never, never, never say millennial reign. It is not a biblical term. These are the biblical terms. Where'd it go? These are the biblical terms. Hamalchut, the kingdom. Malchut HaMashiach, messianic kingdom. Yom Adonai, day of the Lord. Shabbat Ha'el, Sabbath of God. Or just HaShabbat, the Sabbath. Call it that, but don't call it millennial reign. It's not a biblical term. The wedding supper, that's at the end of the birth pangs, the year 6007. It's called the Sukkot feast. The word for festival, Chag, is feast. It means a feast. Chag means a circle, but it also means a feast. Ha-Chag means the feast. It means also the circle dance. So Sukkot, feast, that's when the feast happens. It doesn't happen when Jesus comes back. That's the resurrection. We're taken for 7 years of the wedding, and then we come back and there's a wedding feast, ha-Chag, after the 7 days of the chuppah, the 7 days of the wedding, to kind of seal, sorry, there's my seal, to seal the wedding. That's the wedding feast, and it's at the year 6007 at Sukkot. Actually 6008 at Sukkot. It's right into the year 6008. Be ready for Jesus. Be ready for Jesus. Like all these say. What is that really? What are we supposed to be ready for? Now, this is interesting. It's translated badly in Greek. All the passages where Yeshua says, ready, be ready. The way it's translated is, be thou ready, or be on the alert. Now, it's very, very mild. And so when you read it, it doesn't really have any impact. It's just like, be ready. Just be ready. Kind of passive. In Hebrew, it's kumi. Wake up. Arise. Wake up. And it's a Rosh Hashanah term. It is a term for the resurrection. Now, if my birthday is on a certain day, and you don't know it, and I've said it to you 1,500 times, I've said it to you 1,500 times, and you still don't know the day of my birthday, what will I say to you? I'll say, wake up! Because you don't know my birthday. And that's precisely what Yeshua does 6 times in the scriptures. He tells the Talmidim, 4 Talmidim only, and then he tells a bunch of other people, wake up because you don't know the day. You don't know the kingdom. You're not ready. You don't know the kingdom. You can't picture it in your head. You don't know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen and where it's going to happen and to whom it's going to happen and how long it will last and why it happens to them. You don't know. You're not ready. These are the things you're supposed to know. Now, the reason I'm saying this to you is because I know that this is what we're supposed to know. How do I know that? Because it says it in the Tanakh hundreds, if not thousands of times. And then people come to the New Testament, they throw all that out, and they start over. So what do you think is going to happen? All that prior knowledge is gone. It's dispersed. And you're left with a whole new religion. Well, what do we do in this new religion? Let's just do what Jesus said. Let's love everyone. And that's what ended up happening. And by the way, Yeshua never said that. But that's what ended up happening. So, be ready for Jesus coming? No. Are you ready for Jesus coming? No. Wake up, because you don't know the day of the Lord. Wake up. You know, people hate this. Christians hate this. They hate it. They hate when a Jew tells them, Christians, to wake up. Who do you think you are, Jew boy? Who do you think you are? You don't have the right to tell us to wake up. Really? Okay. Then don't listen to me. But I'll tell you this, if you don't listen, you ain't going to wake up. It's never going to happen. You're still going to be thinking that you have the right to judge that prior knowledge of Judaism, and you don't. You don't. And whether you like it or not, whether you feel it's appropriate or not, Yeshua told me, go tell them when I'm coming. Well, he's coming only in context of the day of the Lord. And he said to his stupid disciples, because they didn't know the day of the Lord, wake up, because you don't know. And if you don't believe me, it says that, go check me. Go check the Greek. Go check the English. Go check it in the Hebrew version if you want. I don't care. It says it. Because you don't know. Wake up because you don't know. And he says it over and over again. All right. Enough of that. Now, the last one. I don't even know if I want to approach this. If you begin to talk about the day of the Lord, and if you begin to start talking about the details of the day of the Lord, and being ready for the day of the Lord, you immediately have to talk about times. Because in Judaism, in the festivals, and in the Shabbat, and in Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, is all the information given to the Jewish people in the services, in the prayer books. It says that in Romans chapter 3, and it says that in 1 Chronicles 28, that to David were given all the services. And it says in Romans that to the Jews were given the services. In all the information about the festivals is contained all the details of the day of the Lord. And so you immediately are going to have come into your mind, but no man knows the day or the hour. It's a lie. And there's really no other way to say it. This is a lie. It's not in the scripture. Don't go to Matthew 24:36 and try to prove me wrong. Go to Matthew 24:36, please, and read the context, number one, and you're going to see that Yeshua said, day of the Lord, day of the Lord, day of the Lord, day of the Lord, with all the verses he quoted 120 times, and then he said, in an English sentence, but concerning about that day and that hour, people don't know, the angels don't know, only the Father knows about that day. He's quoting Zechariah chapter 14, verse 12, which says that day is a unique day, one day, known to the Lord. And this is in the context of him saying in that day and describing the day of the Lord. I think it's more than 8 times. He's describing the day of the Lord, and he says that day is a unique day. Is it 14:12? Check me. That day is no? It's in 14. That day is a unique day, known only or known to the Lord. Maybe verse 13. So, this is a problem. It's an enormous problem. Because rather than just saying the Bible just doesn't say that, Messianic Jews have come along and said, oh, that's an idiom that relates to Rosh Hashanah or relates to Rosh Chodesh, the new moon. Not true. It just doesn't even say it. That was in chapter 12. Verse 6 and 7, 14:7. It will come about, verse 6, it will come about in that day that there will be no light, the luminaries will dwindle, for it will be a unique day, one day, which is known to the Lord. That's all it's saying in Matthew 24:36. But it's only after he has said day of the Lord 120 times. And those are only the ones I've found. There may be more. All the verses that he quoted that all say, in that day, day of the Lord, or day of something. Day of pain, day of sorrows, day of birth pangs, day of joy, day of whatever. And then in the rest of chapter 14, Zechariah says, in that day, a dozen times. So, here's the thing. What Yeshua said in Matthew 5:19 has been taken very lightly. And so the body of Messiah is not ready for the coming of the kingdom. We're not kingdom ready. Whoever keeps and teaches them, the mitzvot, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Learn the mitzvot, and you will learn the kingdom. That's basically what it's saying. If you learn the mitzvot, if you do and learn the mitzvot, you'll learn the kingdom. This is the kingdom. This is your hope. I've shown this, I don't know, 50 times during teachings, this image, and people still don't understand why I'm showing this image. This is the kingdom. In that day, all the nations will flow up the mountain to Zion. Zion is not a mountain yet, but it will be in the kingdom. It will be a high mountain in the kingdom. And there will be the temple on the top of that mountain. And you know, I've looked up images that Christians have uploaded onto the internet for the mountain, the kingdom, just the kingdom. And they're all Roman columns and, you know, things like that, things that look very Hellenized. It's the temple that is our hope. The temple on Mount Zion. And all of Judaism restored and flowing down from that mountain into all the earth, like it says in Habakkuk and in Isaiah. In that day, the knowledge of the Lord, and Habakkuk says the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, will flow out into all the earth and will fill the earth like waters cover the sea. That's our hope. So, if you say, are you ready for Jesus? Think about how flimsy that is now. It's flimsy, it's airy, it's ethereal, it's light. It carries no weight. This carries weight, but only if you know it. You got to know the kingdom in order to be ready for the kingdom. You understand what I'm saying? I want to get you kingdom ready. When Israel left the land of Egypt, the sea looked back and fled away. The mountains skipped like rams and scattered the hills like lambs before the Lord of hosts. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord will be chief of all the mountains and raised above the hills, and all the nations will come to it and say, oh, come let us go up to the mountain of the Lord. Oh, come let us go up to the mountain of the Lord. His glory covering the heavens, flashing from his hand, His face is like the sun. The everlasting mountains shattered. The hills collapsed, and His ways will never end. No, in the last days, the mountain of the Lord will be chief of all the mountains and raised above the hills, and all the nations will come to it and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord. My flock wandered on the mountains, scattered through the nations, my flock on every hill. There was none to seek the scattered sheep without a shepherd, so I sought them for myself, high and lifted up above the earth. Yerushalayim Hallelujah. All the nations will come worship in the city set upon a hill, for all the world to see. Oh, in the last days, the mountain of the Lord, it will be chief of all the mountains, raised above the hills, and all the nations will come to her and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord. Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord. They'll say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord. That's our hope, not the coming of Jesus. Can you see and feel the difference? One is, it's gossamer, it's easily shredded, but the other holds hundreds and hundreds of details and specificity and clarity, so that you can actually see it in your mind's eye about what is coming to the earth. That's why things are getting so bad, because that's coming. And it's like a woman, a skinny, beautiful, hot woman who gets pregnant and her whole body gets blown to shreds. For her to have that baby, she gets fat, her hormones are kicking in, she's screaming at everybody, she feels horrible all the time. That's what's happening. And then the birth pangs come and the baby's born. We're pre-birth pangs. And she's getting ugly. Her hormones are raging, and she's putting on weight, and she is not happy. And that's what's happening. That's why things are getting so bad. And they're only going to get worse. And then the birth pangs will come when the day of the Lord comes. Remember, they're in the beginning of the day of the Lord. So, my hope, my passion, my drive is for you to do Judaism. Do the mitzvot and listen to them talk to you. And as you do them, and you hear them preach to you, they'll preach to you about this. And you'll come to know this, the kingdom, the mountain lifted up that all the nations are going to be drawn to and come to learn about God. And here's the thing, are you going to be one of the learners or one of the teachers? Because if you're teaching Christianity, sorry, but you're at the bottom of the barrel. You may be there, but you're going to be eating a plate of brisket on the outside of the gate, looking at all the people who are enjoying the kingdom. You'll be in the kingdom, but you'll be least in the kingdom. This is all about rank. It's not about salvation. If you have salvation, fantastic. Now come to know what God taught us, which is the kingdom. You do that by doing Judaism and looking for the kingdom and Yeshua in it. If you don't have salvation, you're not even in the game. So get in the game. Come to the Messiah of Israel. Let him make your dead spirit alive, so you can come to the kingdom and you can have salvation, but not just have salvation, have relationship with God and come to know the Lord. Shabbat Shalom.